Okay, in this video, I'm just going to give a quick lowdown, the overview of the Calgary Land Use Bylaw. So, no matter where you work, like whatever municipality you're in, they're all going to have a similar um, format of land use bylaw. It may not be online like this and interactive, but they'll have a binder or PDF or something like that with their land use rules. So, for example, even if you do work in the MD of Rocky View, in some small towns or what have you, there's a similar basically land use regulations that they would have basically. So you always want to just make sure you're current to wherever your project is and make sure you pull up the right ones. So I mean, we're looking at City of Calgary, so we'll look at this one. Part one, the only thing I really ever use in here is the definitions and methods. So everything's defined in here basically. You don't have to go here a lot because if you ever see a word underlined or an italics, you could just click on it and it gives you the definition, but it's there nonetheless. Part three is important. So this is a rule governing all districts. So no matter what kind of district you have, whether it be low density, so your R1s, for example, whether it's multi-residential, so your MUs or something like that, commercial, industrial, so on and so forth, no matter what the district is, all these rules apply, all of them apply to all the districts, I should say. So public realm is an important one. So this is the road right-of-way. It used to be called the road right-of-way. Now they call it public realm because maybe they're realizing that, well, we might not want it for a road, but we might want it for a sidewalk or whatever. So anyways, you just find your street or avenue, and usually it's the major ones, major streets and avenues in the city. And basically they tell you the distance between. So for example, a lot of you are in Montgomery, Trans-Canada Highway. So between 46th Street West and McKay Road, the current distance from property line to property line across the road is 26.213. In the future, the city might want to take some land back and make that distance from property line to property line 36.576 meters. And they're telling you in this case that they're going to take the difference between the two, the 10.363 meters from the south side. So it's not always like that. Like, if you go to Edmonton Trail, for example, they're taking 5 on each side, 5.182 meters on each side or what have you. So you just have to look through that and see if this applies to you. Some projects that are in the airport vicinity, there's extra rules there basically for acoustics, and certain uses can't go in the airport vicinity, so that could become important. There's the floodway, flood fringe, and overflow maps. Those are always important to check. So this relates back to the maps themselves. So um, these are basically the rules, but you go to the maps and which map do I want here? You go to the map and then you find a site wherever your site is, and then you click that map. Actually, I think it's the same map it's going to load. Anyways, yeah, it is. So if we zoom in here, you'll see there's a legend somewhere. Oh yeah, it's over here on the left. So the orange is the flood fringe, and the red is the floodway, and there's overflow information. So if you went back to the land use bylaw, you'd probably see some verbiage in that floodway, flood fringe thing regarding that. But anyways, the way you look at this is you just find where your site is. Okay, so I'm gonna pick a site that I'm familiar with, right here. Okay, so it's kind of a bad example, and I actually remember this, but this number right here, so between these two lines is a number, basically, that changes. That's basically telling you that that's the flood height. Okay, so that number means something, and if you go back to the land use bylaw, it will tell you that your main floor has to be at that elevation above sea level, for example. There's other things as well. You can't put electrical rooms and mechanical rooms below that level and all this kind of stuff. So anyways, it's important to know if you're in a flood zone, and then always just do your homework as to what it is. Like I think in the downtown area, like if you're in that flood fringe or something like that, there's actually language in here saying that you got to raise your main floor a certain height, and that's why you see stairs, say, on some buildings downtown. It's because the land use bylaw is forcing them to do that. Rules on lighting don't really go there too much. Signs, you might have a pylon sign or something like that, but typically not using that too much. Obviously, motor vehicle stalls, that's an important one to review. Actually, this is a good one right here. So I'll do a different video for that for reading this chart. But motor vehicle stalls, basically, you know, the chart's the main place to go, I guess. If you have 90-degree parking, tells you your minimum aisle width and how big the stall is. You find the width of the stall here, but you also have to read through the other stuff in here as well. If you're into parkades, you know, um, you have to look at how the column's interacting with that parking stall, and you know, if you have wheel stops where they're needed, what they have to be like, that type of stuff. So you got to read through the whole thing. Loading stalls is in there, but that's an important one. Um, Uses and rules. Okay, so you know all the different types of uses in your project. So if you have office or whatever, you always got to read about what it is and see if there's any special requirements for it. And then I'm going to skip over to commercial districts here. So, you know, this is no different than, say, the residential ones. You have, say, your C-Core 1, and it gives you all the, you know, information of what has to be done or what can be built in C-Core 1, for example. One good thing to pay attention to is in the districts is always the purpose. The purpose is a good thing to read, because if you read this one, for example, C-Core 1, it pretty much tells you that the lanes are for motor vehicle access to parking and buildings. So if it's C-Core 1, they don't want to see an access from the street. They want it from the lane. Like it's telling you that right off the bat. And opposed to that, if you go to C-Core 2, it kind of tells you the opposite. So parking can be located on any side of the building, basically, and its primary access is from the streets or lanes, basically, and or lanes. So anyways, that's those rules. And yeah, the rest in here is just similar stuff, you know, other districts and things like that. And maybe I will go back to this motor vehicle parking situation, because if we go to like say an office, for example, and this is kind of a new thing in Calgary, there is there's a couple of sentences deleted right there. So those sentences used to say how much parking was required based on that use. They've since deleted this. I haven't gone through all of them, but in some of the land uses in the commercial districts. So they've deleted that and basically said, we're not going to force you to any amount of parking necessarily. You, as the developer or owner, can decide what's appropriate and give us the rationale as to why that's appropriate. Okay, so that's why they've deleted them. So it's really open now, but it doesn't mean you can't be responsible for your actions. There still is some bicycle parking stuff here. But anyways, that takes me back to this chart right here. You do have to remember that we still are going to have requirements for barrier-free parking stalls out of the Alberta Building Code. So what they've done here in this section is said, okay, yeah, we've kind of opened the floodgates to let you decide how many parking stalls are appropriate for your development, but we still need to set a base minimum for barrier-free. So that's fine, okay. So what they've done here is they've pretty much just taken the old parking requirements for any particular use, I think, for the most part. So for example, they've thrown office into their group A. Do not mix these groups up with your building code groups. They are completely separate. But if you look at an office, they're saying, okay, if you had 1,000 square meters of office space, you need one more motor vehicle parking stall for every 100 square meters of space. Okay, so you need 10 parking stalls there. And then with that, you're not providing 10 parking stalls. You're now just providing whatever the building code requires for barrier-free parking stalls based on that 10. And so I've opened the building code here. You could also look at the land use bylaw, or sorry, the Alberta Barrier-Free Design Guide, but I have the code here. In section 3.8, the section on accessibility. So I've just went to 3825 and it says, okay, if you have 2 to 10 parking stalls required, then you only need 1 barrier-free stall. So if from the calculation in the land use bylaw, from this chart, if you calculated that you needed 12 parking stalls, then you would be required at that point, you'd be in this range, and you have to do 2 of those, whatever you decide to do. So now the land use bylaw said, okay, well, you don't have to do the 12 stalls. So if we go back to here, let's stick with our 10, the number we were sticking with. So you may decide that I don't want any parking on my site. Let's just say you decided that. I think it's probably a bad choice, but if you decided no parking, basically what this chart is telling you is that, well, no, you still have to provide 1. That's barrier free. Okay. So again, if you went back to the example of 12, if you had 12 stalls, this chart is telling you that you now need to provide two barrier. If you required 12 stalls, you need two barrier-free parking stalls. So because the land use bylaw isn't actually telling you how many stalls you have to do based on that office use, it's saying, well, you've calculated that and you would need 10, so we're just going to do one. If we calculated, say, 1,200 square meters of office space and needed 12 stalls, but we were actually only going to put in 8 stalls because we wanted to, we had the rationale for it, then what it's saying is you still need to provide those two barrier-free parking stalls. So of 8, you still need 2 based on the building code. Anyways, that's kind of a rundown of the major parts of the land use bylaw. The other thing to pay attention to as well, actually, I should mention, is for each part, like so for commercial districts, always check the general rules as well. So again, the general rules here apply to all the different commercial designations there. If you're in industrial, same thing. So there's a whole bunch of industrial land use types. There's general rules for all of them. So you never want to overlook that one as well. There's some important stuff in there. And same goes for residential. Okay, so your R1s and RC1s and all that kind of stuff. There's general rules that apply to all of them.